What happens when controversial refereeing decisions collide with questions about the integrity of the world's biggest football tournament? That's exactly what we're looking at today. Following Argentina's dramatic comeback victory over Egypt, emotions ran high as Egyptian players publicly questioned whether the tournament had been fair. But this discussion quickly moved beyond one football match. It became a wider debate about FIFA's credibility, recent controversies surrounding the organization, and whether public confidence in football's governing body has been damaged. You'll also hear references to earlier decisions involving FIFA and growing concerns about governance, transparency, and whether recent events have made fans more willing to question the fairness of major decisions. As you watch, pay attention to the difference between concerns based on perception and claims that require evidence. That's an important distinction throughout this discussion. Do you think football fans are becoming too quick to assume the worst whenever a controversial decision is made, or has FIFA created an environment where those doubts are understandable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy balanced political and current affairs commentary, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss future discussions. Interesting insights ahead. Let's watch the discussion together. And afterward, I'll share my thoughts on what stood out the most.
Last night, Messi's Argentina were 2-0 down with 15 minutes to go against Egypt. Incredibly and controversially, Argentina won 3-2. Egypt star Mustafa Zico then accused the World Cup of being fixed. He was denied a goal when Egypt were 1-up, while Mohamed Salah had claimed a penalty before Argentina went on the counter-attack and won the game. The referee was not fair, said Zico. The injustice was clear. It is clear, he said, that this tournament has been fixed. Nick McGeehan is director and co-founder of Fair Square, which has pressured FIFA over its governance since before the Qatar World Cup in 2022. Thanks very much for coming on the show, Nick. What's the difference here between a team that have lost and are sore losers about it and any evidence that they've been mistreated?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me. I think the problem is that because of how Trump has behaved and because of how Infantino appears to have bent to this pressure that he's been placed under over the Balogun red card, that I think that's sort of bleeding into conspiracy theories and probably fueling conspiracy theories.
I'm a person that loves sports and was a good athlete, and I understand sports really well, really well. And that wasn't a foul. That wasn't even an infraction. That was two guys running full speed that happened to crash into each other. You can't take your foot and properly place it on somebody else's foot when you're going, no, these were two great athletes that got tangled up, and this referee, who is a little bit suspect, if you check his past, I don't want to say that because I don't like to create controversy, but very suspect. If you'd like, I'll provide you with the past. He made a call that nobody could believe. You know, even people on the other side, they say, oh, we got lucky. Wow, and it's very interesting. They say they don't show them in slow motion. And I never realized that. I never heard of that before, that they're not allowed to review in slow motion because it's so different. Because you'll take one little quarter of a second and you'll see that a hand is touching a neck or you see something. Whereas when you see it in fast motion, it will look like two guys collided, which is really what happened. They got sort of entangled. He didn't do anything wrong, and he's our best player or one of our best players, a very vital player, and he gave him a red card. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't think it meant much. Then I started hearing that means he can't play in the next game, at least in the next game. I said, boy, that's a big, if it happened to another player, it would have been unfair, but when they take your best player, or just about, they have some great players, and they say you can't play, that's very unfair. That's, it's one thing to penalize somebody for the game, but how do you penalize them for a game that hasn't been played yet? It's very unfair. You can't do that. So, yes, I asked for a review by FIFA. I spoke to a man who's highly respected, and by the way, whose level of respect has gone up tenfold.
So it's giving fuel to people who, can make these claims and who can argue that every time a decision goes against them, it relates to, some sort of FIFA malpractice. So, I mean, I didn't see the game, to be honest, and my views on refereeing decisions aren't worth a jot. But I think the larger issue, the much larger issue, is how Infantino is bending to the will of Trump and what that says about FIFA as an organisation.
There are fears there have been some fears for time that FIFA have a bias in favour of the nations they like, whether it's in this World Cup, I guess it would be Argentina and France, because they want the big nations with all the star players to be there at perhaps the expense sometimes of the plucky upstart countries who might just about beat them.
Yeah, and again, I think that is entirely plausible, right? When you look at what FIFA is an organisation that looks to accumulate as much money as possible because money leads to power, and power for guys like Infantino. So if they think that broadcasting revenue is going to be hiked up because these star players are playing, then it's likely that they want them involved. Now, does that equate to them meddling and fiddling so that they reach the latter stages? That's a big leap. You need some serious proof to say that, but you can understand why people might think that. I think it's fair to say.
I'm not a conspiracy theorist, Nick. I think it's incredibly difficult for an organisation to determine the outcome of a football match in advance of it. But I am a bit worried because going into the quarter-final match on Saturday, England have 4 players on yellow cards, and if any of those players, including Kane and Bellingham, receive another yellow card, they are banned from the semi-final. And I note here that cards per fouls for countries in the World Cup among the quarter-finalists, we're top. England are top. We get a card every 7 fouls. Do you worry that there might be a way in which Harry Kane and Jude Bellingham are booked for nothing here?
Oh, to be quite honest, I'm not that worried about Harry Kane and Jude Bellingham.
I could tell from your accent, Nick, that I wondered whether you were a little bit less interested in England than I am.
It's a valid. I mean, again, I think my view on on-field matters isn't really worth much, and I don't believe in conspiracy theories either. I think the point is, though, that you have these concerns, and a lot of people listening to this will have these concerns. Let's go back to why we have these concerns. We have these concerns because FIFA isn't being governed properly, because Infantino is unfit to govern FIFA, and FIFA's unfit to govern football. And now these issues that we've been talking about for a very long time, which have tended to be off the pitch, are now bleeding onto the pitch, and that's the problem that we're facing.
People are left asking, what is it that we're actually watching here?
Exactly. For a long time, we're a human rights organisation, and we've been talking about off-the-pitch stuff for a long time, but it has been on the radar for a long time that this level of misgovernance eventually is going to bleed onto things on the pitch. It has already, to be quite honest, but it's become very evident, very blatant in this World Cup. So, yeah, I think it's, as I say, it's entirely reasonable that people would have these concerns going into a match like that.
Has FIFA created a credibility problem that now follows every controversial decision? That's the question I kept coming back to throughout this discussion, and I'd really like to know what you think. Leave your opinion in the comments below. One point that stood out was the distinction between evidence and perception. The conversation acknowledged that controversial refereeing decisions happen in football, but it also explored how recent events may have made people more willing to interpret those decisions through the lens of distrust. That's an important difference because suspicion alone isn't the same as proof. Another notable argument was that FIFA's governance and leadership have become part of the story itself. Rather than focusing exclusively on what happened during one match, the discussion suggested that previous controversies have affected how fans interpret future decisions. Whether that perception is justified or not, trust is difficult to rebuild once it begins to erode. At the same time, the discussion was careful not to present allegations as established fact. While concerns about favoritism and governance were raised, it was also recognized that claims of match manipulation would require compelling evidence. That's an important reminder, especially when emotions are running high after a dramatic result. Perhaps the biggest takeaway is that confidence in sporting institutions matters just as much as the decisions themselves. Fans need to believe that every team is competing under the same rules and that controversial moments are handled consistently and transparently. Once that confidence is questioned, every difficult refereeing decision risks becoming another source of controversy. What did you think after hearing this discussion? Do you believe the concerns raised were understandable, or do you think people are reading too much into a difficult football match? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments because I'd genuinely like to hear both sides. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss future political and current affairs commentary. Thank you for watching, and remember, Public trust is one of the hardest things to earn and one of the easiest things to lose.